and we'll get into this week's night class. Cool. So we'll start with a little bit of revision. Cool. So last week we looked at some industry governance bodies and their different roles. So we talked about the Electrical Workers Registration Board, or the EWRB. Everyone seems to love to hate them, but unfortunately we do have to deal with them day in and day out, because they're the ones who control licensing and all those lovely, lovely things. WorkSafe New Zealand, more specifically energy safety. So they enforce electrical safety regulations and they investigate incidents and issue safety notices. They're also where you will find the high risk database, and we'll look at high risk. What is high risk work tonight? But basically every time you do high risk work, it gets entered into the database, and so you can search it up based on address. So you've got the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, or MBIE, and they develop and oversee New Zealand's building and electrical safety framework. We talked about the Electrical Engineers Association, or the EEA, and they provide guidance and best practices for the electrical supply industry. And we also talked about the New Zealand Inspectors, NZIE. Basically, it's a group of New Zealand inspectors. Most inspectors belong to it, and they get together and make sure that all the inspectors are up to date on various things that they need to know about. Cool. So where can we access these documents? The documents we need to. So we can access via legislations.gov.nz. We can access the Electricity Act and the safety regulations. On WorkSafe New Zealand's website, we can access safety guidelines and compliance requirements. The Standards NZ website gives us access to 3000, the wiring rules. Unfortunately, there's subscription required, but as part of our registration, we get access to all of the legislation that applies to us, or the standards that apply to us. And the EWRB website gives information about licensing and competency requirements. Cool. So knowing where to find this information ensures that as electricians and electrical workers, we can work safely and legally, and so that way there's no excuse for us not knowing what we should be doing. If we don't know something, we can always look it up, or we can contact any of the people on the list we talked about previously. Especially the NZ inspectors, they will always be able to help. You can also always talk to master electricians, especially if your company is a master electricians company. Cool. So what are the key roles of the following industry bodies? So a bit of revision. So what's the key role of the EWRB, guys? Licenses, licensing and registration. Yep. Yeah, for the most part, they're in charge of licensing. They're also in charge of, they manage competency and training requirements. So one thing that happens in New Zealand is guys will come here from overseas. At the moment, we have a guy from Italy, Philippines, and we've got a couple Japanese guys, and they're on what we call the stages courses right now. So they're qualified in their home countries, but the EWRB doesn't recognise their qualifications, unlike Australians who can pretty much come over and apply for registration based on their qualifications and experience. Depending on where you come from and the experience you've had, they require you to do the courses called stages, and there's stages 1, 2, and 3. And some guys will have to do stages 1 and 2. Some will only have to do stage 3. And depending on what the EWRB says, it'll be so many thousand hours plus the stages course plus sitting the regulations exam. and that will dictate what they need to do to get qualified here in New Zealand from overseas. Cool. So what are WorkSafe in charge of? Safety. All good, Jack. We're just doing some revision. Join in. Okay, I'm glad everyone said things like health and safety. Yep, accountability within work environments. Yep, good one. Yep, it's a lot better attitude than it used to be. When I worked on job sites, everyone just called WorkSafe the Narc Squad. Not a very good attitude to have. They do serve a purpose, and yeah, they've shown up to your job site. There's usually a reason. Cool. So they enforce electrical safety laws, they investigate incidents, and they issue safety notices. It'll be WorkSafe who issue safety notices, like some of you guys would have seen recently about the Serene bathroom heaters, possibly. So a whole bunch of Serene bathroom heaters got deemed electrically unsafe. And so they issued a safety notice saying, do not install these, they're not safe. And then there was a recall notice because of that. Cool. So what did MBIE do? The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Quality of life improvement. It's an interesting way to look at it. Okay, so as far as the MBIE, yeah, I guess they do try to make industry, yep, quality of life at work. So they oversee New Zealand's building and electrical safety framework. So they're in charge of the framework that we work to, and they ensure regulations remain up to date. So if a regulation is no longer fit for purpose, they're the ones who are in charge of making sure that it's changed to make it fit for purpose. Cool. So where can electricians access legal documents and safety standards? So there are a few places like we were talking about earlier. So there's the legislation.govt.nz. There's there you can access the Electricity Act and safety regulations. So the WorkSafe NZ website, you can access the safety guidelines and compliance requirements. The Standards New Zealand website, you can access ASNZS 3000, so the wiring rules, subscription required, which we get through our EWRB registration. And the EWRB website gives us access to licensing and competency requirements. Cool. So that's revision for tonight. So cool. We're going to have a look at the legal hierarchy of acts, regulations, standards, and codes. Cool. So first, the Electricity Act. So it's the primary legislation. It's considered the law itself. So the purpose of the Electricity Act is it sets out the framework for regulating the electrical work done in New Zealand. What makes it unique? It's the highest authority. All other electrical rules come from this. So if there's something set out in the Electricity Act that's contradicted by any of the following legislation, it's the Act that gets priority because that's the top thing as far as the rules go in New Zealand. Cool. So some key points about it. It establishes the Electrical Workers Registration Board, or the EWRB. Without the Electricity Act, the EWRB isn't really a thing. It defines who can legally perform electrical work. So it sets out the requirements, the very basic requirements for electrical work. And then that's then interpreted by the EWRB. It provides the foundation for all of the other electrical regulations. So that's what we build the foundation of our electrical work on, is the Electricity Act 1992. And then we have the electrical safety regulations, or the ESRs, as we refer to them. So these are the rules under the Act. It's more of the how-to guide. So the purpose of it provides specific safety requirements for electrical work, defining what is legal and safe. What makes it unique? It spells out risk classification, testing, tagging, and compliance requirements. So it sets out the different levels of risk that we deal with, what testing needs to do, the requirements for tagging of appliances, and how compliance works. So some key points, it defines what we call low, general, and high risk work. And we're going to look at this a little bit later as we go forward. It specifies when certificates of compliance, COCs, and electrical safety certificates are needed. And it cites specific standards, e.g. AS NZS 3000, that must be followed. So it needs to be cited in the electrical safety regulations for it to be a legal requirement. So if it's not cited in the safety regulations or the Electricity Act, it won't be in the Act. If it's not cited in the regulations, it's not a requirement. So right now, the ESRs cite AS NZS 3000 2007. Even though there's a newer version, 2018, it's not cited yet, so it's not legally required or enforceable. Cool. And speaking of which, then we have the cited standards, so AS NZS 3000 or 3017 and so on. So the purpose of these, so they're technical standards, they're the practical rules. So they provide the technical details on how electrical work must be carried out. So it gives us details on how work should be carried out, how to do things, minimum distances, maximum distances, minimum height requirements, maximum height requirements, and things like that. Size of conductors, circuit protection requirements, all those kinds of things. So what makes them unique? So the regulations legally require electricians to follow them. So the regulations cite the standards, and then the standards are what we need to follow. So it's a legal requirement that we follow these standards. So some examples. So you got AS NZS 3000, 2007 currently. So the wiring rules, they cover how electrical installations must be designed and installed. You've got AS NZS 3017, verification and testing. So it covers testing and verification of electrical work. And then you've got your AS NZS 3760, which is your test and tag, which are the rules for testing portable appliances. All good if you're just joining us, Ethan. We're just talking about legislation, and then also the video will be up later if you've missed anything. Cool. And then we've got electrical codes of practice. These are your kind of best practices, kind of a guideline. So they're advisory, but sometimes not mandatory. So the purpose of these is they provide guidance for specific areas of electrical work. So I'm pretty sure there's an ECP for conduit work. There's an ECP for car chargers. Actually, no, there's a regulation for car chargers. Never mind. Yeah. So what makes them unique? So some are mandatory if referenced in the regulations. If they're not referenced in the regulations, then they're not mandatory, but they are still best practice. And so it's good to be aware of them. So some examples: NZECP 51, there's safety requirements for use of portable electrical appliances, and NZECP, installation of power lines in rural areas. That's a big one because obviously, where do we find these? So ECPs should be free to access online, actually. So we want to look up NZECP 34. Cool. So you can find them on WorkSafe. Yep, I just searched it up on my computer and now I have downloaded it onto my computer. So, yep, NZECP 34, New Zealand Electrical Code of Practice for Electrical Safe Distances. So that's wrong. ECP 34 is about safe distances, not, yeah. So yeah, all of the electrical codes of practice are available on WorkSafe. You just have to Google them and you can look through WorkSafe to find a specific one if you want to. So yeah, ignore NZECP 34 because it's about safe distances, not power lines in rural areas. Cool. So why do we categorize electrical work? Cool. So why might some electrical work require stricter controls and extra checks? High risk, yep. Differences in voltages, yep, definitely. So what factors might determine, so what factors determine whether it is low, general or high risk? So yeah, areas that they're installed, potential contact, environment like hospital, yep, hospital is definitely a high risk environment. And why do you think we need certification? So ESCs, COCs, ROIs to confirm the work has been completed correctly. Make sure it's up to standard, accountability, checked over properly, paper trail, safe to connect to the power source. So if anything goes wrong, we could see who could be liable. Yep. Um, Another reason, so one thing is if you're like some of us going through the process of purchasing a property, you can look up on the property when the last time high risk work was done to it. If you go to a job and you think, oh, this work's been done incorrectly, it should have been inspected, you can check if it was. So you can look up a property, you can look up your property and see when the last high risk was done. Yeah, unfortunately, you can't search by person. You can only search by property on the public one. If you have a login, I think you can look via name, and the EWRB can definitely look at people in the high risk database via name. Also, um, this is something you guys won't need to worry about now, but maybe in the future, depending on what you end up doing in your electrical career. But if you look to do your inspector's course and get your inspector's ticket, you will need a minimum, what they're looking for at the moment, a minimum of 3 entries into the high-risk database as you being the primary electrician, but not the inspector. So like if you upgrade a switchboard or you replace an earth stake, those are some examples of high risk work that needs to be inspected. You need to be the primary electrician who was on that job. So at the moment I have 2 because I've done 2 main switchboards in the last year. So I'm trying to get my 3rd before I then go and try and do my inspector's course. Cool. So risk classification. So where can we find the definition of the risks? So they're in the ESRs. So they define 3 risk categories. You've got low risk work, minor repairs and replacements. You've got general risk work, considered standard installation work. And you've got high risk work, work with a greater potential safety hazard that must be inspected. So these classifications dictate what paperwork, ESC, COC, and ROI, is required for different types of work. So where in the ESR 2010s can we find these category definitions? Which regulation? It is Regulation 6A with Schedule 1 backing it up, defining what prescribed electrical work is. So, should have it. So the electrical safety regulation. So what you can do, if you're like me, I've downloaded a copy of the electrical safety regulations onto my phone, just so I can have it for reference. So you've got 6. So it does take a while to get through it. I've gone too far. Yeah, it's the best way to do it. Download it onto your phones. You can always reference it. Yeah, prescribed electrical work. So for the purpose of the definition of prescribed electrical work in section 2(1) of the Act, prescribed electrical work is electrical work of a type described in clause 1 of schedule 1 that is not work of a type described in clause 2 of that schedule. So you can actually look up, if you have it on your phone. So schedule 1, prescribed electrical work. So there's a lot of detail here and there's a lot of legal language. So it's work described in, so the following work, clause 2, following work is electrical work, low voltage fittings, work done on low voltage fittings but only if the work is done in accordance with ECP 51 without payment or reward, and the work consists of replacing fuse link, fixing plug. There's a lot of stuff in here, but we'll worry about defining high and low risk tonight, because you guys will go through that when you get into year 3. But it's good to get yourselves familiar with what prescribed electrical work is. Cool. So we'll break down the risk classifications. So we've got low risk electrical work. So low risk work is defined as minor repairs and replacement that do not alter the load characteristics of an installation. And no significant change to the electrical system, only replacing like for like. So some things that you think are high risk are actually low risk if you're just replacing like for like. So if you're replacing like for like, so I'm replacing that main switch with exactly the same main switch that was there, or I'm replacing a broken fuse holder, main fuse holder, with a new main fuse holder that's exactly the same. I'm not removing or changing any of the conductors, then it's low risk work. So some examples. So replacing a damaged socket outlet. No, if you're replacing an entire mains cable, you are replacing a conductor. So that is high risk. So if you're replacing the mains cable or altering the mains cable, like relocating it, then that is high risk electrical work. But if you're just swapping out an existing fitting, so the fitting itself, yep, even if it's the same size, if you're replacing like for like with cable, because you're replacing an entire mains, it's because it's a conductor, not a fitting. Does that make sense, Daniel? If you're replacing the cable but not the fitting, it becomes mains work. So yeah, if I replace a conductor running through a house, I would class that as general work because I'm making changes to the conductor itself. Uh, yeah, because I'm not working on the main earth neutral, so mains earth or neutral. MEN being high risk, yeah. But because I'm literally just replacing the fitting, so taking one off, putting one on, I'm not changing any conductors. I'm not removing or adding to any conductors. I'm just changing a fitting. So that's the best way to think of low risk is replacing like for like, swapping straight away. But as soon as you start making more changes, and there's no reason why you can't think it's possibly in between, it's safer sometimes just to assume it's of the higher risk. So if you're tossing up between it being low risk, or medium risk, high risk, if you're leaning between medium and high risk, you can always call an inspector and ask. If you're leaning between medium and low risk, just think it's medium risk, do a COC, cover yourself. Swapping out a light switch, again, light for light, replacing a faulty oven element. But if it's a fixed wired oven, a freestanding stove is technically an appliance, so because it's plug-in, so that's just maintenance of an appliance. Cool. So why is this classified as low risk? The work does not introduce new hazards or major changes to the system. No formal certification is required, but the electrician is still responsible for ensuring safety. So certification requirements, an ESC is recommended to confirm the work is safe to use. Any low risk work I do, I just issue an electrical safety certificate, mostly because I have insurance and the insurance is less likely to pay out if something goes wrong if I don't issue any form of certificate. So always issue some form of certification, even if it's just a small job, you can do an ESC. If you're replacing a fuse, it's replacing a fuse. That's something a homeowner could do. I wouldn't even consider that low risk. Just some old ladies aren't really, by fuse, I mean like a cartridge fuse, not a rewirable. Don't quote me on that. Cool. So then we move into our general risk electrical work. So definition, so work that requires the electrician to consider various elements regarding electrical operation and safety of circuits and fittings. So alters the installation but does not fall into high risk categories. So some examples, installing new circuits in a house extension. We're not changing the mains, we're not doing any work to the MEN. So all we're doing is adding new circuits. So it's general risk. So running a sub main to a detached garage, so a sub main, so long as that sub main includes an earthing conductor. If you run a sub main out to a detached garage, but you put in an earth stake, you've created an MEN, so it's high risk. That's what some guys get caught out with. Then you've got upgrading lighting systems in a commercial space. So if you're upgrading the lighting system, that's general risk in a commercial space. Even if you're replacing, so if you're not replacing light for light, but you're upgrading, introducing new lights, moving lights, changing lighting points, changing where the cable's running, that's all considered general risk. Cool. So why is it classified as general risk? So these jobs change the installation's electrical characteristics, meaning additional safety considerations are needed. So the electrician must verify compliance with AS/NZS 3000. So for example, if you're running a new circuit for an extension, you must make sure it's on RCD because that's a requirement under AS/NZS 3000. Any new power outlets in a domestic situation need to be RCD protected. Same if you upgrade the switchboard, you can't, even if it's got plug-in MCBs with no RCDs, if you upgrade the switchboard, you have to put in RCDs. Cool. So certification requirements. You must issue a COC or a certificate of compliance. You're legally required to verify that the installation meets the relevant standards. Okay. How many of you guys have actually seen a COC or an ESC, the electrical safety certificate, which confirms the work is safe to be connected to supply? Okay. Oh, give me a second. Oh. So here is your basic COC. Cool. So up the top, you've got your reference ID number. So this is covered in block course a little bit, but we'll go over it now. So yeah, so here's the certificate ID number. So you'd put in here, I normally put the address and date, so that way I can remember it. I know they did the job at this address on this date. Location details, this is not just the address of the building that you worked on, but exactly where you worked. So if you say, I did some work at level 4, 191 Thornton Quay, you're basically signing off the whole floor. But if I say I did some work in Office 1, level 4, 191 Thornton Quay, I'm only talking about one particular office. So the contact details, so that's of the person who is at the address. So that would be, say, Mark Webster, who's the LSM, level 4, 191 Thornton Quay. So you name of electrical worker, so your name, your practicing license number, your phone and email address, and the name and registration number of persons supervised. So when you're doing electrical work and it's general risk with your employer should be putting in your electrical work, their electrical worker name and number here, and then your name and your training license certificate number should be in this here because you technically work there as well. Down here, you can spell out what the type of work is. Was it in addition to the property? Were we making alterations to the property, or were we doing new work? So it's a brand new installation. Is it altering the installation, or are we adding to the installation? So the prescribed electrical work is low risk, general, or high risk. And if it's high risk, we need to specify why. So for example, if it's high risk, it was mains work. We replaced the main switchboard. We ran new mains cable. We replaced the main earth stake. Means of compliance. You'll learn a bit more about what part 1 and part 2 of 3000 is. But unless you have a certified design by an electrical engineer, pretty much all the time you put part 2. Additional standards or electrical codes of practice. So if you use any additional standards to do your work, you tick yes and you specify which ones. If no, tick no. So date or range of dates that the work was undertaken, so the day you started and the day you finished. So fittings that are safe to connect to a power supply, yes. Unless, of course, you install some stuff from Temu, in which case, no. Do not install stuff from Temu, please. So specify the type of supply system. So 3-phase MEN, single-phase MEN, single-phase neutral screen MEN. Installation is earthing system that is correctly rated where applicable, yes or no. So parts of the installation which relate to the certificate. So either you're ticking all if it's a brand new house or a brand new installation, or parts because you only worked on parts of the installation. So work relies on manufacturer's instructions. So did you have to read the instruction manual because it has specific requirements for you to undertake? If so, yes, and then attach and identify the instructions manual, including name, date, and version. So attach a copy of the manufacturer instructions to the certificate, or provide reference to readily accessible electronic format via link. Cool. So work has been done in accordance with a certified design. If you tick part 1 and you have a certified design, yes. Otherwise, most likely, no. I've only worked on one certified design in my entire time since I started doing my apprenticeship back in the day. Cool. Relies on a supplier conformity, supplier's declaration of conformity. So did you install fittings that you had to get an SDoc for because they're not standard fittings? If yes, tick yes and attach a copy, or click a link, add a link to the where you can find the documents. So for example, jarussels.co.nz or ideal.co.nz or advanced.co.nz. So the installation has been satisfactorily tested in accordance with the safety regulations. Tick yes. You shouldn't be ticking no because you should have done your testing. Then here, just this little box here, you can write a description of the work, exactly what you did. And here, so your polarity independent earth, does it pass? What was the reading? Your insulation resistance, it should be above so many mega ohms, but the minimum is 1 mega ohm, which is 1 million ohms of insulation resistance. Your earth continuity should be less than 0.5. Bonding should be less than 0.5 ohms. Fault loop impedance, you just write it in. And then your other, you would normally put your prospective fault current or your short circuit current. Then you sign it and you date it. Cool. So that is the COC section of this. But if you notice, it's an electrical certificate of compliance and electrical safety certificate. So this bit up here says that it complies. It's been done in accordance with 3000. But here down here is the safety certificate. So by signing this document, I certify that the installation or part of the installation to which the electrical safety certificate applies is connected to a power supply and is safe to use. So you can do the COC and not get it connected to power. You can do the COC, get your inspection, not connect it to power, and then only fill out the safety certificate when you connect it to power. And then again, certifies name, signature, issue date, practicing license number, and the date it was connected. So customer copy, this is an important document and should be retained for a minimum of 7 years. That applies to us too. So if we issue a COC, we need to hold on to it for 7 years. That's a requirement. Back to the slideshow. Cool. So yeah. So why is it classified as general risk? So job changes the installation's characteristics, must verify compliance, and then so those are the certification requirements. Then we go on to high risk electrical work. So if you notice, the slides have changed from green to yellow to red. This is the dangerous part. This is the dangerous stuff. So the definition, so work that presents a high risk to people or property and must have a second set of eyes to ensure it was completed correctly. It legally requires an independent inspection to prevent errors or complacency. So some examples of high risk work. Upgrading a main switchboard because it is the main switchboard and contains the main switch and more than likely the MEN link as well. Electrical work in hazardous areas, so fuel stations or medical facilities, mining, explosive situations. So like, do you guys know that a flour mill or flour factory is considered a high risk and explosive area? Because when flour and air mix, if there's a spark, it can create a very big bang. And then you've also got paint factories, because paint factories use a lot of solvents and flammable materials. They're hazardous areas as well. New mains installation in a commercial building, or basically any mains work. If you're working on the main conductors or main earth stake, more than likely requires inspection. If in doubt, call someone, ask them. They'll always tell you, be able to tell you. Someone will always be able to give you advice. Cool. So why is it classified as high risk? So mistakes in high risk work can result in serious injury, fires, or system failures. Regulations require an independent electrical inspector to review the work. And so the certification required, you must issue a COC. So it's issued by the electrician to confirm the work meets legal standards. It also contains, that COC contains an ESC, which confirms the work is safe to connect. So ROI is issued by an electrical inspector to verify compliance. So interestingly enough, you can issue a COC without an ESC. Basically, I am saying with this COC, any work that I've done on this job comply with the legal standards and requirements of 3000 ESR and the Electricity Act, but it is not safe to connect because it is not complete. So if you have a job that I don't know, you get kicked off of for some reason, you have a spat with the main contractor or the homeowner, or you have like the construction company goes bankrupt, you still have to issue a COC because you've done electrical work, you've done prescribed electrical work. And even though the job isn't complete, you're finishing on the job. So you issue a COC with all of the test results you have available, all the documentation you can get your hands on, any photos that you've got. You then issue that COC to whoever you were contracting to, and you're basically saying, cool, here's all the work I've done, here's why it complies. It's all good to go. If you just need to finish it off and then get someone else to do the rest of it and sign an ESC and COC to state that it's safe. But I'm saying that it complies, but it is not safe to connect because none of the fittings have been fit off. All the wires are still hanging loose in the walls, but it all is compliant. It's not safe, but it is compliant. So that's the difference. And then an ROI can only be done by an inspector, and it needs to be independent. So the person who signs the COC can't be the person doing the inspection. It doesn't mean you can't be from the same electrical company. It just means that the electrician should have been the one, or needs to have been the one to actually do the work, and the inspector is the one who signs off the ROI and does the inspection. Some companies that you work for may require you to get an outside inspector. So, for example, Wakefield Hospital, they had their own inspector that they used all the time, and he was the one who had to sign off the work in the medical areas that required inspection. We couldn't get one of our inspectors to do it. Cool. So why do these categories matter? So why do we need to, why do these categories matter to us in the electrical industry? Why do you guys think these categories matter? Why the different definitions matter? Yep. Potential error documentation. Yeah. So why do low risk jobs require less documentation than high risk ones? It's kind of in the answers in the question, yeah, because it is low risk. So lower risk means lower requirement for certification. So it means with the less risk, certification. More risk, more certification. So what could happen if high risk work was not independently inspected? So independently inspected is the key. So what if we could inspect our own work? Yeah. Cowboys. Yeah. Yep. So you guys, yeah, you're all hitting it on the head. Yeah. So basically, we have an independent person inspect our work, because it gets rid of that complacency. It gets rid of people cutting corners. It's yeah, a second pair of eyes never hurt anyone. And sometimes it kind of puts a little bit more uh, oomph behind people wanting to do a better job because they know their work's going to be inspected. So they want to they want to make sure it's extra neat inside that switchboard because the inspector's going to be in there. And also, if your work looks messy and the inspector finds things, then it's more likely because they have the legal right to ask you to open everything in the installation. Because you're saying that the installation is compliant. If they find something inside when they're doing their basic checks that's not compliant, they're going to go, well, what else have they done that's not compliant? And they might get you to open things up for them to have a look at. And that's just more work for you. And yeah. So yeah, how do the COC, ESC, and ROI documents protect the electricians and the clients? Yeah, proof of work carried out. Yeah, yeah, any work you do. Yeah, so the documents are to protect you and the clients as well as the inspector. So if you sign a COC stating exactly what you did and you put in there so much description in there that proves exactly I only touched this part of the house, I only worked within this area, I didn't do anything outside that area. Half of the stuff I was working around was here before I did anything. Like I didn't replace the main switchboard. I just took the old circuit protection out that didn't have RCDs, put new RCBOs in, or replaced the RCDs and three breakers with three RCBOs to make more room for new circuits. Then you make sure you say that because if for some reason something goes wrong with that main neutral or the main earth connection, then it's not your fault because you didn't touch them. You only installed new circuit protection. You didn't install uh, the switchboard itself. And then also it just makes it easier to when you have insurance issues or when you have to like someone makes a complaint about you to the EWRB, you have more stuff behind you to back you up. But yeah, insurance won't cover a job that was done for a cashy and there's no documentation. So unless you did the job, got paid for it, and issued the right documentation, you're not going to get insurance. Um, yeah, and then you end up in court, and then it's messy because you got to wait for lawyers, and then no one's happy at the end of the day. Okay, so we've got one more activity to do. There we go. Cool. So, industry governance and legislation. Cool. So we're going to go through some scenarios, and there'll be some questions for you guys to answer. Cool. So compliance detective. So which legislation documents apply? Which risk classification does the work fall under? What certification is needed and why? Cool. So scenario one, you're replacing a faulty power socket outlet in a residential home. It's like for like swap with no changes to the wiring or loading. So what legal documents apply and what certification do we need to add? Yeah, so in ESC, what safety documents do we need to apply to it? So what, yep, so ESC AS/NZS 3000, yep. So, so yeah, we need to issue an ESC, the legal document, so safety regulations and the wiring rules. It is low risk and it's an ESC. So this is a minor replacement job that doesn't introduce new risks or alter the circuit's electrical characteristics. It's a low risk, but the electrician is still responsible for ensuring it's safe to use. Issuing an ESC provides evidence of compliance. So that's what we're going to be going through. I think there's 5 scenarios. So yeah, the legal documents required, what's the risk classification, what certification do we need, and why? Cool. Scenario 2, an electrician installs a new sub-main circuit from a switchboard to a detached garage. So what legal documents apply? What's the risk? What certification do we need to issue and why? Yep, COC, yep. 3000, yep. Yep, potential ROI, depending on whether we make it an MEN, yep. General risk, yep. Cool. So yeah, so the legal documents, so electrical safety regulations 2010, the 3000 wiring rules, possibly 3008.1.2, which we've looked at previously for cable sizing. So the risk is general risk as it's new installation that alters the electrical characteristics. Potentially high risk if it's far enough away that we're wanting to put in a new earth stake. So sometimes the detached garage could be all the way down the hill, and we've got to run a 16 mil neutral screen submain down to the garage just because of the distance. But if we were to run an earth in that cable, so you can get 16 mil TPS, it comes with a 6 mil earth, but sometimes it's too expensive versus just putting in an earth stake and get an inspection, depending on how big the job is. For the certification required is a COC, Certificate of Compliance, and an ESC, Electrical Safety Certificate. So why? General risk work changes the installation and requires verification that it complies with standards. The COC confirms the work was completed according to regulation, and an ESC ensures it's safe to connect to supply. Cool. Scenario 3, an electrician upgrades the main switchboard in a commercial building. With a big chunky switchboard that lives in the basement. Yep, definitely Rex, yep. I don't know about 3017, definitely 3000, but what about the ESRs? We definitely need to worry about the ESRs as well. Oh, yeah, so the legal documents, safety regulations 2010, 3000 wiring rules, possibly NZECPs for switchboard construction or location. Definitely location. Most of the time, if you're doing a main switchboard in a commercial building and it's a big one, you're going to get that made off-site by a switchboard manufacturer. So the risk clarification is definitely high risk. This is a major work on a main system. So the certification required. So the Sparky needs to issue a COC and an ESC, and then we definitely need to get an ROI by an independent inspector or an inspector who works for our company who didn't do the job. So why upgrading a main switchboard carries significant risk, e.g. serious injury and fire. The law requires an independent inspector to ensure the work is compliant and safe before being livened. Cool. So 4, an electrician installs an EV charging circuit in a residential property. Cool. Hey Blake. So most of the class is almost done. We're just doing the last activity. Join in. Just make sure when I update the videos later, you join, watch that. But I'll make sure to add that you were here tonight. Cool. So for EV charging, cool. So you've got the safety regulations, and you've got 3000 for the wiring rules, 3008 1.2 for cable selection, and then NZECP 51 for charging equipment guidelines. So Sean, you mentioned 4836, so that's for low voltage and extra low voltage electrical installations. I'll have to have a read through that later. Cool. So yeah, risk classification. So general risk work. So it's a new installation work, altering circuit. So you're altering the circuit load. So you will need to issue a COC and an ESC once it's safe to connect. So why? It's a new circuit installation, and although it involves significant load consideration, it isn't classed as high risk unless additional factors like hazardous areas apply. The electrician must certify compliance and issue an ESC. Cool. Oops. Okay, so they've done a bad job of doing this. We'll just go to the last one. So, scenario 5, an electrical contractor is rewiring sub-circuits in an old dairy shed. So, the legal documents, so electrical safety regulations, you've got your 3000 wiring rules, and you've got your NZECP 54, electrical installations in dairy sheds. So, it's general risk work because it's installations or alterations of circuits and a standard installation with specific guidance from NZECP 54. So when we looked at the COC before, additional standards, you would put NZECP 54 electrical installations in dairy sheds. So your certification requirements, you've got your COC and your ESC. So why? So even though the work is in a specialist environment, NZECP 54 outlines best practices and requirements specific to dairy sheds. It falls under general risk unless there's work on mains or in classified hazardous areas, in which case other requirements may apply. COC and ESC confirm the work is compliant and safe. So you'd have to check whether NZECP is cited in the regulations. If it is, then it's a legal requirement. Otherwise, it is just it is just best practice. Cool. So that's it for tonight, guys. Obviously, if you've got questions, feel free to stick around and ask those questions. Otherwise, make sure you guys you jump on your Moodle, do as much as your Hive. Sorry, we use two systems, an old and a new. So make sure you go on the Hive, have a read through the material on there, do the quizzes. Must be coming up time soon to do the assessment or the assignment. I'm just going to jump on there myself. So yeah, as far as block course, the emails don't get sent out until 6 weeks before, which is really annoying. And depending on where you are, it will dictate where you're going. So there's one starting on the 26th of May. So the Monday through the Friday. And then there's another one starting on the 9th of June, Monday through Friday. They're both 1 week. And so you guys will get an email 6 weeks before. I've been trying to get them. So tool list, you will just need your basic hand tools. So pliers and screwdrivers. You can bring impact or like a drill if you want, or electric screwdriver. You won't need to, if you have your own meters, bring them. Otherwise, we have them for you guys to use while working here. Yeah. So the next assessment doesn't open until the 5th of April, and then it's due by the 20th.
Yeah, I got that same question wrong. I was going to ask you about that, Stuart. I couldn't find with the fusible